I may not be Gokaiger or Captain Marvelous, but I can still take some time out of my day to celebrate and appreciate the 35th anniversary for one of my favorite game franchises, Fire Emblem. If this video meets its deadline, it should be up on Fire Emblem's 35th anniversary. And in order to celebrate such a momentous occasion, I thought it would be nice to invite you, the viewer, to the series in a brief franchise overview to introduce you to Fire Emblem and recommend potential entry points so that you can partake in one of Nintendo's legacy titles. But right before we can begin this full introductory course, I'd like to go over a few. One major point that I would like to make is that though I may technically be a series veteran, by no means do I consider myself an expert on Fire Emblem. I know general strategies and ways to clear up maps with relative ease, but I do not fully understand the games underneath the hood nearly as well as the Pokemon franchise. I am a relatively new fan, with my first Fire Emblem game being Fate's Conquest, released in... What the fuck? Do not expect any deep dives or guides to any of these particular games. There are plenty of other experts on YouTube that can provide that kind of information much better than I can. This video is meant mainly for people that may be interested in getting into Fire Emblem, and will cater largely to a newcomer audience who only want to taste a small sample of games before trying the main course. I will also be going over the mainline Fire Emblem series, but will briefly go over side games that I feel are at least somewhat relevant, or that I have some knowledge about. Depending on the game, this will also include the opinions of Grant, Ian, and another one of our mutual friends for each of the games that they have played. Their opinions are their own and will be shown when talking about each game when relevant. There is also one final matter to discuss, and that is the availability for some of these Fire Emblem games. Many of the games, especially earlier in the series history, may be difficult or expensive to get a hold of. Some of them were not even officially translated or distributed internationally, or made available through legitimate means anymore. So if you want to acquire and play some of these games, do them through your own means. Inferno Co. is not responsible for viewer actions, and will not condemn or condone them in any way. The very first Fire Emblem game is Fire Emblem 1, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. Garneth the Dark Pontifex invades the kingdom of Altea, and Prince Marth must reclaim his homeland to stop Garneth, and his plan to revive Medius the Shadow Dragon. History would call this event the War of Shadow. As the first game of the series, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light is Fire Emblem at its most bare bones. A classic for Fire Emblem fans, though it is lacking in many of the key mechanics later introduced in the franchise that will become a core parts of its identity. A decent place to start if you don't mind the classic NES game speeds and want to start with an extremely straightforward style of gameplay. Across the sea on the continent of Valentia is Fire Emblem 2 Gaiden. The North Kingdom of Rigel worship the Warfather Duma and invade their southern neighbor of Zofia, whose people worship the Earth Mother Milla. This game features two protagonists, Alm and Celica, as they take separate journeys leading two different armies to repel Rigel's forces and save Valentia from Duma's madness. Alm leads the western campaign to repel the armies of Rigel, while Celica's campaign in the east goes on a quest to figure out why their protector Milla has gone missing. As the name may imply, Gaiden is considered a side story to Fire Emblem 1 and takes place sometime shortly after Marth's story, and can be considered its own standalone adventure, with a couple of returning characters from the first game. Fire Emblem 3, Mystery of the Emblem, is split into two parts called books. Book 1 is a retelling of Fire Emblem 1 with some characters and playable units cut, and Book 2 is a sequel, taking place roughly 2 years after Book 1. Hardin was one of Marth's allies from the War of Shadows, and suddenly goes mad and begins to wage war against the entire continent of Archanea. Marth must take up arms to stop his former ally and uncover what caused Hardin's sudden turn to evil and destruction. This event will later be called the War of Heroes. On the continent of Yggdrasil, Loptus, the Earth Dragon and Dark God, hatches a multi-generational plot to rid the world of humanity and prove the domination of dragons over mankind once and for all. It is up to Sigurd and later his son Seliph to put an end to Loptus' evil bloodline and save Yggdrasil. Fire Emblem 4, Genealogy of the Holy War, is often considered one of the best entries of the Fire Emblem series for its complex gameplay, expansive maps, and deeply profound story. It is also a cornerstone for many of Fire Emblem's most iconic game mechanics, such as the weapon triangle first being introduced here, skills that now affect combat, as well as an iconic love system where pairing certain characters together in Generation 1 would grant children that would become playable units in Generation 2. The fifth Fire Emblem game is Fire Emblem 5, Thracia 776, taking place in the middle of the previous game, Fire Emblem 4, between Sigurd and Selva's portions of the game, on the Thracian Peninsula during the year 776. This game's protagonist is Leif, the exiled Prince of Leonster, who leads a rebellion to liberate his home before joining Selva's campaign during the Holy War. Leif is Sigurd's nephew and Selva's cousin through his mother Ethelyn, who is Sigurd's younger sister. Thracia 776 is considered one of the most difficult games of the series, especially to new players, so if you decide to embark on Leif's quest, be sure to do so with extra caution. It was while writing the script that I decided to call the first 5 games as part of the Kaga Era, named after series creator Shozo Kaga, who was the lead designer and/or director of these games. After completing the first 5 mainline Fire Emblem games, Kaga would leave Intelligent Systems and develop Tearing Saga, and later Vesteria Saga, separate from Fire Emblem. Games 6 through 8 I like to call the GBA Era, with the first of these games being Fire Emblem 6, The Binding Blade. 1,000 years ago, humans and dragons lived in harmony on the continent of Eleb, until war broke out between the two in an event called the Scoring. Towards the end of the conflict, humanity created the divine weapons to slay the dragons, though this ravaged the lands of Eleb and so the divine weapons would be sealed away. By the modern age, King Zephiel of Bern suddenly attacks the neighboring kingdoms of Sakai and Ilia with an army of dragons long thought to have been banished, next pointing his blade to Lycia, where Lori, the young lion, will have to take up arms against Bern by reclaiming the Blinding Blade and the other divine weapons to stop King Zephiel and the Dragon Horde. Do note that you will require the Binding Blade and the 8 other divine weapons and bring them into the final chapter to unlock the game's true ending. After Fire Emblem 6 is Fire Emblem 7, The Blazing Blade. Alternatively, this game is also simply known as just Fire Emblem, or sometimes Fire Emblem GBA by fans, as this was the first Fire Emblem game released to an international audience. I don't know why the heck they dropped the subtitles and just called it Fire Emblem, so don't ask me about that. Set 20 years before The Binding Blade, Fire Emblem 7 features Roy's father Eliwood and his 2 friends Hector and Lyn as the protagonist trio for this game, where they set out on a journey to eventually unravel a dark plot to unleash the wrath of the dragons who had not been seen in Eleb for the past 1,000 years. This is often considered one of the best places for a beginner to start Fire Emblem, as the open and Lyn portion of the game was meant as a tutorial prologue and will teach you the fundamentals of Fire Emblem gameplay that apply to every entry in the series. The second part then revolves mainly around Eliwood's part of the story mentioned earlier, with a Hector mode unlocked as sort of a new game plus for those seeking an even greater challenge that views the story from Hector's perspective. Ian and friend B give their thoughts on Fire Emblem 7, saying the main trio are a great band of characters that they enjoyed seeing together, but they found the Lyn portion to be dragging and too easy since they have played other Fire Emblem games prior to this. Although the Hector mode provided a sufficient challenge that they thought was rather fun, and both highly recommend this game, especially as a first Fire Emblem game. The 8th and final Fire Emblem game released on the GBA is Fire Emblem 8, The Sacred Stones. 800 years ago, the Demon King Formodus led an army of monsters, but was sealed away by the power of the Sacred Stones. Fast forward to the modern day, the kingdom of Archanea is suddenly attacked by its ally, the Empire of Grotto, and monsters began to ravage the land once more. Renee's king Fido urges his daughter Princess Erica to flee with the knight Seth, and she goes in search of her twin brother, the Crown Prince Ephraim. The twin lords then seek out their friend Prince Leon of Grotto to find out why his father suddenly declared a war against the neighboring kingdoms. Partway through the game's story, you're given the choice to choose which of the twins' campaign to play during the middle third of the game, with some story differences. The Sacred Stones is often considered one of the easiest Fire Emblem games to play, and is another great place to pick up and play for your first adventure. The next two Fire Emblem games are part of the Tellius saga, named after the continent the two games are set in. Here exist two races of people, the Bjork, their word for human, and the Laguz, who are clans of shape-shifting people who can transform into animals and beasts. Fire Emblem 9 is Path of Radiance, with the beloved Ike as his protagonist, who was a member of his father's mercenary company in the land of Crimea. All is well until the neighboring kingdom of Danes suddenly invades Crimea, and Ike must help Princess Valentia of Crimea repel Dane forces and restore the Crimean monarchy while recruiting the Laguz and easing racial tensions between the Bjork and the Laguz. An excellent first game to try thanks to its rich storytelling and beloved cast, made even easier in the international version thanks to the introduction of an easy difficulty, replacing the Maniac difficulty exclusive to the original Japanese version. Also receives a personal recommendation from Ian thanks to his admiration of Ike, and most importantly, Ike's iconic reoccurring rival, the Black Knight, who many fans have called him the Darth Vader of Fire Emblem. The only real downsides are that this game is packed with around 30 chapters full of slow battle animations and long enemy phases, so some chapters can easily take up to an hour to complete. Fire Emblem 10, Radiant Dawn is a sequel taking place 3 years after Fire Emblem 9. This game's protagonist is the silver-haired maiden of Dawn, Micaiah, leading the Dawn Brigade to fight back against oppressive post-war Imperial occupation, and eventually team up with Ike in order to stop a Divine Judgment Day from raining down on both Bjork and Laguz kind. Much like Fire Emblem 9, Fire Emblem 10 is rather long with a little over 40 chapters and vastly steps up the difficulty, as it assumed players would have completed the previous game first. Infamously, this game's normal, hard, maniac difficulty options were translated as easy, normal, hard, so players that selected normal were actually playing on hard mode. Radiant Dawn is also a sequel game, so there will be some spoilers or narrative confusion if you skip Path of Radiance. Fire Emblem 11 is Shadow Dragon, a remake of the very first game made for the Nintendo DS with all of the original chapters and playable units restored. This more definitive edition of Marth's story also includes updated mechanics and several quality of life features found in later games, as well as brand new secret characters meant to be built-in safety nets that are unlocked in case you lose too many units in your army. Fire Emblem 12, New Mystery of the Emblem is a remake and retelling of Fire Emblem 3's Book 2 with updated mechanics, quality of life features from more recent games, with brand new added content, an expanded story, and was the introduction of casual mode for the series, where fallen units do not permanently die and will return the next chapter. This game was never officially released outside of Japan due to the poor sales of the previous couple games. As lightly mentioned in the previous game, confidence in the Fire Emblem series was waning due to relatively low sales numbers, so Intelligent Systems put in their best efforts and managed to create what many fans consider to be the savior of the franchise and started the modern era for Fire Emblem, Fire Emblem 13, Awakening. Set 2,000 years after the Archanea series and Marth stories, his descendants Prince Marth and Princess Lissa stumble across an amnesiac tactician lying on the ground named Robin, who helps them defend the Halidom of Ulysse from the neighboring kingdom of Plesia, led by the Mad King Gangrel. They later meet a mysterious swordsman named Marth, named after the legendary hero king of Archanea, who warns them of upcoming dangers that are soon to come. Awakening contains many of the best aspects of prior games and puts them all into one bundle, such as the navigable world map from Fire Emblem 8, combat skills from Fire Emblem 10, and even pairing certain characters together to unlock a second generation of units just like in Fire Emblem 4. New to Awakening is a pair-up mechanic where two of your units can occupy the same square and support each other in combat. This was the first game for Ian, Grant, and Friend B, and is applauded for its story and gameplay. Easily highly recommended first game for anyone new to the series. Following up on Awakening's success, Fire Emblem 14 Fates would be split into two separate versions where you play as Corrin and must decide to either side with family from the Kingdom of Nor in a path of dark conquest, or side with Blood with the Kingdom of Hoshido in a path of light birthright. There is also the third path of revelation where you uncover who was orchestrating the war between the kingdoms of Nor and Hoshido, but after the Nintendo 3DS eShop's closure, the only legitimate way to play what is arguably the truest ending is to get a hold of the Fates bundle copy, or you will be left to find an unofficial alternative way to play the third route. If you manage to get a copy of all three versions, Birthright is the easiest and most beginner-friendly, whilst Conquest is one of the most difficult games in the Fire Emblem series, even for veteran players. Revelation's difficulty is somewhere in between, and I would recommend it be played last as it resolves mysteries left open from the other two. It also opens a massive roster from both the Birthright and Conquest campaigns, and the Revelation route is an excellent sandbox for unit customization. Ian enjoyed the gameplay and appreciated the sheer amount of content available if you bought the entire collection. He also said the split paths idea was good in theory, though failed in execution. Friend B had similar sentiments, though shelved the game and did not complete any of the routes. Grant had harsh words to say about Birthright, who said Conquest was near perfection and was the best Fire Emblem game he has played. The first of the Fire Emblem side games is the Fire Emblem mobile gacha game, Fire Emblem Heroes. The rival nations of Asker and Embla are at war, and a legendary relic called the Breidablik summons the player, default name Kieran, who can use the Breidablik to call upon various Fire Emblem characters from across the Fire Emblem multiverse to fight alongside Asker and the Order of Heroes. The story arcs of Fire Emblem Heroes are divided into books, and as of the writing of this video, the latest one to release is Book 9. Heroes takes many inspirations from Norse mythology. The third and final Fire Emblem game released on the Nintendo 3DS is Fire Emblem 15, Echoes, Shadows of Valentia, a remake of Fire Emblem 2. This definitive version of Almond Celica's tales have been fully reimagined with modern graphical power and a beautiful art style, with the addition of several new characters, an expanded story, fully explorable 3D dungeons to adventure through, and even a new post-game bonus chapter that turns this game into a pseudo-prequel to Awakening. In case this game needed any more compliments, Fire Emblem 15 is also the first game in the series to be fully voice-acted. Grant, Ian, and I can fully praise this game's story, and can excuse the minor quirks and inconveniences that it faithfully adapts all the way from Fire Emblem 2. The second side game is Fire Emblem Warriors. The next row of Fire Emblem game, and first for the Nintendo Switch system, is Fire Emblem 16 Three Houses. On the continent of Odlin, there exist three great and powerful nations who send their best and brightest to the Garreg Mach Monastery, where the Central Church of Cerros and the Officers' Academy sit in the center of Odlin. You play as mercenary turned Professor Byleth and must choose which of the titular three houses to teach and later side with during the war that occurs during the game's second half. Do you choose to side with Princess Edelgard from the Adrestian Empire and the Black Eagles class, Prince Dimitri from the Holy Kingdom of Fargus and the Blue Lions, or Claude, the future Duke of the Leicester Alliance and leader of the Golden Deer House? One of the most popular and best-selling entries of the Fire Emblem series, and the second major influx of new Fire Emblem fans since Awakening. Many fans consider this to be their favorite game due to the sheer amount of history and world building that this game contains, living in an immense setting with an expansive story, and an endearing cast of characters with many different quirks and personalities. As for some other opinions, Grant said that he enjoyed the first run of Three Houses, though found it difficult to return and play multiple routes. He also said that the maps were a bit uninspired, which is a sentiment lightly shared by both Ian and Friend B. Although Ian and Friend B did find the social aspects of monastery life and the character building to be enjoyable, saying it reminded them of Persona. Ian also said Manuela hot and Mercedes best, while Friend B said Rhea hot and Marianne best. Boys. I enjoyed the majority of the game and agree with all of their opinions, but I do understand Grant's sentiments of the replayability slowly becoming monotonous, and I do think you need to play at least 2 of the 4 routes to truly appreciate the game's story, so long as you don't mind the repetitive first half of the game and many of the reused maps for all the routes. If you would like a possible solution on this conundrum, hey, I made a video about that, go watch it. The final side game is a spin-off to Three Houses, Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes. A hack-and-slash warrior-style beat-em-up game taking place in a whole new set of alternate timelines, where the war in Three Houses occurs years ahead of schedule and forever alters the course of Outland history. all because this game's main character, Shez, gets lost in the woods late at night and encounters the three main lords before Violet does in the main timeline. As the only member of the group that has finished this game and all of its routes, I think it's a fun alternative what-if scenario to the Fodlan story, and I think some of its gameplay features can be brought into the mainline Fire Emblem series to make a better war simulation game. Now, if only 3 hosts managed to actually finish the stories for each of the routes and not just end on cliffhangers. The penultimate entry on the list in the latest Fire Emblem game is Fire Emblem 17 Engage. Fires 1,000 years ago ravaged the continent of Elios as the fell dragon Sombron wages war against humanity and the divine dragons, until they are aided by familiar heroes from other worlds, now taking the form of emblems. In the present, Alir, one of the last divine dragons, awakens as the power that sealed Sombron away begins to weaken, and they must unite the continent and gather the emblem rings to stop him once again. Fire Emblem Engage was meant to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the series, but was delayed due to development issues, and the COVID-19 pandemic caused it to miss the intended date by a couple of years. Engage is praised for its excellent maps, its fun gameplay, and the inclusion of the emblem characters to celebrate the previous entries in the series, though its simpler story and overall weaker character writings are points of criticism. As for our opinions, Ian and friend B greatly appreciate this game's mascot creature Sami. Ian enjoyed the characters and their support conversations, but thought the cast was too large and had too many characters that fulfilled similar roles. Grant had much harsher words to say, having grievances with Engage's art direction and the hub world he found boring. He also did not enjoy the emblem mechanic as it made the gameplay too easy, and he was not a fan of the cutscene that focused on Vale's foot. That only happened for a brief second and you keep bringing that fucking shit up in the— You stop that! To conclude this more than 20-page script, Fire Emblem is a great strategy RPG series with a plethora of games that I would highly recommend, and suggest to anyone who hasn't played any of the games to give them a try and see if they like them or not. As a final recap for what I would consider the best first games to try, there is Fire Emblem 4, Genealogy of the Holy War for its fantastic story and gameplay if you can figure out an alternative way to get a hold of the game. Fire Emblem 7, the Blazing Blade's terrific trio and introductory Fire Emblem tutorial prologue. Fire Emblem 8, the Sacred Stones for being one of the easiest games in the entire series. Fire Emblem 9, Path of Radiance for its story and relative ease so long as you mentally prepare for the long campaign. Fire Emblem 11, Shadow Dragon as it's the definitive version of Marth's story. Fire Emblem Awakening for its story, cast, gameplay, and a collage of some of the best parts of the Fire Emblem franchise. Fire Emblem 16, Three Houses for its setting, the characters, and excellent unit customization, although I should mention I highly recommend you play at least 2 of the 4 routes to fully appreciate the story. Games I would discourage as your first game are Fire Emblem 5, Thracia 776, Fire Emblem 10, Radiant Dawn, and Fire Emblem 14, Fate's Conquest due to their higher difficulty. Three Houses is a fine game to start, but make note that its structure stands out and is different to the typical Fire Emblem game, and I think requires multiple playthroughs to fully appreciate its story. Fire Emblem 17, Engage, while I don't think it's a bad game, it being a celebratory anniversary game makes a lot of callbacks to previous titles that may not be fully appreciated by new fans. And that is the list. Let me know if this was a good introduction for new fans and which Fire Emblem game you would like to try after. For veteran fans, how well did I introduce and summarize each game? Or what games would you first recommend someone play to get into Fire Emblem? And with that out of the way, thank you all for the watch, have a good day, and happy anniversary to Fire Emblem.